Good morning, everyone. Lance Tarchione here live with you on Ask the Agronomist this morning. Appreciate you joining. My guess is nobody's going to be here today, but Adam and I. It's going to be 63 degrees today. Near record beautiful early December fall day, and I believe it is the first day of the second shotgun deer season here in Illinois. So I don't know why anybody would be watching Ask the Agronomist, but for those of you who are, thank you. And for those of you who don't join live, it'll be here recorded, so you can watch it at your leisure. So once again, thanks for joining. As a reminder, log in to either your YouTube account or just with a Gmail account. If you want to live chat in a question, producer Adam is here with me this morning, and Adam will be watching the chat. And we always love to get those live chat questions. And just kind of a reminder, in 2 weeks, we will have probably what's going to be the final episode for the year. There might be another Thursday morning in there, but it'd be between Christmas and New Year's, and we'll probably take that one off. And on that final episode, I'll be joined by my colleague, Chris Carlisle, and Chris will be going through some really, really good studies that he's done the past few years looking at crown rot. We've talked a lot about crown rot. I'm very fortunate to have colleagues that have a passion to study different aspects of agronomy. And one of Chris's passions the last few years has been to try to figure out what we should be recommending to producers to try to do a better job, managing, preventing, suppressing, whatever we can do. Have fewer issues with crown rot. So Chris has got some interesting data that he wants to share with us, and he'll be with us in 2 weeks. And if you remember, I mentioned on the last episode, I still don't have the details worked out on this, but we are going to do some sort of live giveaway on the last episode for those who are joining us live with that. So hopefully you can join us in 2 weeks, and we'll get into today's episode. So since it's a perfect spray day today, I'm going to touch on fall burndown really quickly, just as a reminder. I know it's December. I know you don't think of spraying in December. Even a normal December is not a bad time to do a fall burndown, and a 63-degree day in December is a really good time to do a fall burndown. So if you're worried about herbicide supplies, specifically Roundup, perhaps for next year, there are ways that you can reduce your need to have Roundup in a burn down in the spring by doing a good fall burn down this fall. And every year in the spring, it seems like a lot of people wish they had done a fall burn down. And energy is high in the spring to do a fall burn down the following fall because you don't like what you're looking at spring in your fields. And by the time you get through the whole growing season and the next fall comes around and you're busy and you're trying to save money, and it's kind of out of sight, out of mind because it's been a long time since you've looked at that mess that you were looking at in the spring, we kind of lose the passion and energy to do fall burn down. So just a reminder, still opportunities to do fall burn downs. That mare's tail particularly is a really important weed to control in the fall. You are not going to kill mare's tail in the spring with Roundup and 2,4-D typically. You can kill it in the spring with Roundup and dicamba, but if you think you're not going to be using dicamba next year, I'd ask you to reconsider that. But if that's your plan, you really need to make sure and get your mare's tail controlled in the fall. So anyway, just a shout out for fall burn down. Got a few things up here on the board, just reminders to myself, and once again, live chat in those questions, and we'll certainly give priority to your question. Adam's got a few things he's going to interject as well this morning. I was at a meeting yesterday. It was really interesting. There was a guy that spoke there who's very knowledgeable of what's going on in the supply chain issues that are affecting fertilizer availability and chemical availability, and all of the manufacturing and weather and trade and geopolitical issues that are impacting all of that are fascinating and frustrating at the same time. We've decided as a society to export to other countries a lot of manufacturing. We just don't do a lot of basic manufacturing here in the U.S. anymore. And frankly, I hope that's some good thing that comes out of all this, is that we realize that maybe we'd be better off to make some stuff here at home. But it's a big challenge right now. And what I would say as a producer is just make sure you're communicating with your chemical and fertilizer suppliers. Make sure they know what you want to do next year. Make sure they know what your expectations are. Recognize that in the current environment, some of your expectations may be unrealistic, and it's probably a good time now to come to grips with that versus next spring. We all need to have some grace for our suppliers and some flexibility. We need to recognize that there are products that are going to be in short supply. We can get, a clean field of beans without using, believe it or not, you could not use Roundup, you could not use Liberty, you could not use 2,4-D, you could not use dicamba, and you could still have a clean field of beans. Now, it's not as easy not using one of those four products or all of those four products. But essentially that's what conventional soybean growers do every year. And every year I see guys who raise conventional beans, and if done properly, those fields are as clean, sometimes cleaner than some of the other systems that are out there. So we're going to be recommending, obviously, that you start with a good residual foundation. That is nothing new, but I do think going into 2022, you could argue that it's more important to have that good residual foundation down, because in some cases your options for post products may be limited by a label, may be limited by a neighbor, may be limited by the weather, may be limited by availability, may be limited by things that you haven't even contemplated things being limited by in past years. But I think regardless of what herbicide system you choose to use in soybeans, having a good residual foundation down up front and planning on additional residual applications going through the growing season to prevent those weeds from coming up. If you do a good job preventing weeds from coming up, you don't have to worry about controlling them post. And for a lot of years, we've relied very, very heavily, probably too heavily, on our post-emergence products. You may hear some announcements coming out of University of Illinois that they feel they've identified a population of water hemp that's resistant to dicamba in Illinois. Water hemp that's resistant to 2,4-D was discovered in Nebraska years ago. This water hemp population that they're working with U of I has actually never even been exposed to dicamba, but yet they feel that it has developed metabolic resistance to dicamba. Still more work being done on that, but it's a foregone conclusion that, within the next few years, water hemp will likely be resistant to dicamba, Liberty, and 2,4-D. And as soon as those three resistances exist individually, it won't take water hemp long to get all three of those migrated into one plant. So a lot of the water hemp that's out there today is 4 and 5 and 6 way cross resistant to multiple different modes of action. Right now today, people have kind of gotten used to the fact that, well, I can't rely on Roundup to kill water hemp anymore. But everybody has migrated to one of the other three as what they're relying on to kill water hemp. You're either relying on dicamba to kill water hemp, you're relying on Liberty to kill water hemp, you're relying on 2,4-D to kill water hemp. And the reality is there is a day coming, probably in the not too distant future, that water hemp will be resistant to all three of those products. There are new chemistries being developed. We're working on a new site of action that'll be a new residual product for water hemp control that water hemp has not been exposed to. But the scary thing with metabolic resistance is there are weeds that are developing resistances to products that haven't even been invented yet. So we used to think that for a weed to become resistant to a herbicide, you had to subject that weed to multiple applications of that herbicide. That's kind of how it happened with glyphosate. But with some of the metabolic resistance mechanisms that water hemp seems to have, it has such a great ability to, overcome and get around and just adapt. And its genetic diversity is just tremendous as a weed species. I mean, it is the model, for a weed that can adapt to, whatever we do to control it. So, I just think it's good to recognize that, we need to raise the bar on weed resistance management. We need to raise the bar on how we manage weeds, and utilizing residuals in your system is going to be a big part of that, regardless of what your favorite post-emergence program is. So, Adam, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that or think I missed.
No, I agree with everything you said there. And we actually had a question come in from Lance Lovelace. So thanks for the question, Lance. He had a comment at first, and I know what he's talking about. So Valor Authority products, some of the PPOs,
Yep.
right? They can be tough on beans in some cases.
Yep.
He says, what's a good option other than those two for pre that maybe we could avoid some of those?
Yep. So that's a great question. And it's a question that's on a lot of people's minds. And like so many things in life, there's trade-offs. I do consider, as a class, I think the PPO chemistry is the best pre-emergent chemistry on the market today for water hemp control. But we do have to acknowledge that they can be hard on soybeans, especially if you're planting soybeans early, especially if you're no-tilling, especially if you've got cold, wet soils. So one thing we've learned kind of the hard way the past couple of years is, when a lot of these products were developed, they were sprayed in a lot of trials, probably planted in May and June. And when you're spraying trials in May and June, that's a lot different environment than a guy who's planting soybeans on Easter Sunday. So we've learned that, there are some products that, while they're relatively safe in May and June, are far more injurious in April than maybe we recognize. So to answer your question directly, basically for pre-emergent water hemp control in soybeans, you've got, the yellow products, your Prowls, Treflans. You've got the PPOs, which you mentioned, your Authorities, Valors, those sorts of products. You've got your Group 15, so that'd be like a Warrant or a Dual, a Zidua, those sort of products. And you've got Metribuzin or Sencor. Those would basically be, I might have forgot something there, but those are basically the 4 different types of chemistry that you could choose to use in a pre in soybeans. Some of those have flexibility to go on early post, which is nice to have. A lot of them do not. So your Metribuzin products and your PPO products are pre only. Your Group 15s have the flexibility to go on early post. I did forget one product that is included in some of those. It's actually a PPO as well. But fomesafen, which is the active ingredient in Reflex, is often combined with Group 15s for soybean pre's. And that product in our arsenal is a product called Warrant Ultra, which actually is a product that does fit what you're looking for, in that it is safer and it has 2 modes of action for water hemp control. And it also has early post-emergence flexibility. So there are people, and we've talked a little bit about this on previous episodes, there are people that are starting to ask, hey, when water hemp generally is a warm soil emerging weed and generally does not really get going until May, does it really make sense for me to put my pre out in late March or early April and let it degrade for 30 to 45 days before the water hemp even starts to germinate? So fair question. Would it be smarter to go ahead and plant my beans, delay that pre-emergent residual application to post-planting, maybe even post-emergence, early post-emergence, and put that product out there later, a little bit closer to the time the water hemp's going to start to grow? In theory, great idea. In practice, need to be careful. If the water hemp gets started before you get that product on, or before it gets activated, you can kind of shoot yourself in the foot there. Because in that case, you would need to have a dicamba or a Liberty or a 2,4-D or something in with that mix to kill the emerged water hemp. because the residual product you're applying is not going to kill the emerged water hemp. But to answer the question, there are other products out there that do offer better crop safety than the PPOs. They may or may not be better in your situation. They may or may not be as good at controlling water hemp. It depends a little bit, in my opinion, on what you're planning on doing post and what you have the option to do post. If you have the option to spray dicamba post, I'm very comfortable, not having the absolute best water hemp pre in the ground. If you don't have the option to spray dicamba post, then I want to have a better pre in the ground. And if you're thinking you're not going to spray dicamba post, you might not be able to get Liberty post, you're not going to use 2,4-D post, and you're not sure on the supply on Roundup, then you need a really, really good pre for water hemp down, because your ability to clean up the escapes post is maybe going to be a little bit more limited than normal. So great question. Hopefully that addresses your question. And if not, there's my number. You can call me and we'll talk about it. So love the live questions. So thank you very much. Anything else, Adam, before we dive into the next topic?
Nope. Thanks again, Lance Lovelace, for the conversation. I'd say you covered it pretty well, Lance.
All right. Okay. So we'll cross off full Burndown. We'll cross off the herbicide conversation. I'm gonna spend a little bit of time on fertilizer. Very, 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 and this kind of relates back to some of those supply issues and things. We've talked about fertilizer in previous episodes, and there's going to be challenges. There's going to be shortages. There's going to be pricing issues. It's going to be very difficult for your supplier to, maybe guarantee they can hold your prepaid price on UAN, for example. So I guess I'm going to just challenge the thinking of us as a farmer. And I'm going to say us here because I'm a farmer as well, and I've had these same prepaid conversations. If a supplier cannot lock in their cost, why would we expect them to be able to guarantee our price? So just a question. I know the retail, business is really struggling right now. If a guy wants to prepay UAN and they have no idea what they're going to pay for UAN in the spring, kind of hard to give me a price as a grower, right? They can give me a price, so I can send them some money. So if I want to do prepay for tax purposes, that's fine. But, if they think it's going to be $400 a ton and it ends up being $600 a ton, who's going to pay for the other $200? So there's just a lot of challenges out there. So this goes back to that communication piece. Be talking to your suppliers. Probably not a great year to be thinking about changing suppliers. So I would say, whoever you did business with last year is probably who you ought to do business with next year. Because if you go switching to somebody else, they probably don't have any product to sell you. And unless you guys are trading customers back and forth, that's just going to mess things up even more. So it's just a very bizarre situation we find ourselves in. Sadly, it's probably going to take more than a year to fix this bizarre situation that we're in. And it might, require us as a nation and as people to look at things a little different than about 60% of us seem to be looking at them today. And those things are hard to change. So it's going to take some time to work ourselves out of this mess. And I don't even know exactly if we know exactly how we are going to work ourselves out of this mess. But it's going to take some time. It's going to take some grace. It's going to take some understanding. It's going to take really good communication. And I would say, as a producer, it's going to take a recognition on our part that, we don't deserve a guarantee. And it seems like the whole world thinks they deserve a guarantee. And I don't know how that got started or how that ends, but I'm gonna end it for me. I don't deserve a guarantee. So we'll go from there. So anyway, that's probably about all I wanted to mention on fertilizer, other than I am so thankful that we ended up with a good fall. There were times 4 or 6 weeks ago, I didn't know if we were going to have any opportunity to do anything in the fall. And if you haven't checked the difference between, what you paid for fertilizer September or October and what it would cost you for that same product next spring, is about double in some cases. So there was a huge financial incentive to get that product applied in the fall. And thankfully, Mother Nature gave us an opportunity to do that. We've still got opportunities to do that. So if you have not applied fertilizer yet, and maybe you typically wait till spring, maybe you're typically not a fall guy, I would ask you to be talking to your supplier and see if there is an opportunity for you to get some product on the ground yet this fall, possibly at way higher price than you would like it to be. But, it may be better than what somebody can guarantee you for spring. So probably enough on fertilizer. Anything else, Adam, that's come in while we were talking about fertilizer?
No, nothing coming in so far.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to touch on a little bit on some solar radiation data that I've pulled together. We've mentioned this a couple times on previous episodes, and I actually had an email question that came in related to this a couple months ago, which we never really did justice to. And the emailer's question was, what impact did I think low sunlight levels at different times through the growing season might have had on the 2021 crop? And my colleague, Chris Carlisle, he's talked to Trent Ford, who's our state climatologist, and got some information for the kind of the Springfield area that showed that 21 solar radiation was a little lower than normal, but it wasn't necessarily, too far out of line with other years. There were actually other years that were better years for yield that were even lower than 21 was for solar radiation, which kind of blew up, some of the theories that Chris and I were looking at. However, I would say the variability of rainfall patterns, the variability of weather, you could have had, Springfield might not have been low solar radiation, but I've got some data that I'm going to share a little bit with you that London Mills, Illinois definitely had a lot of cloudy days this year and a lot of days where we were far, far, far below average for solar radiation. Now, I don't have anything great to compare this to. So the data that I'm looking at is a snapshot of the 2021 growing season. And where I got this data was actually from a solar array that we installed on our farm this spring that started up in late April. And I've got an app on my phone which tells me how many kilowatt hours worth of energy that solar array is generating on a daily basis. And so I plotted that out, and I'll show it to you there. I know you can't see that. That's a limitation of this format that we haven't quite figured out yet, is how I can show you like charts and graphs and slides and stuff and still be here in this format. I know that's one thing that Cal-Al has been frustrated about is it's hard to share data in this format. So I'm showing you I've got the data. I know you can't see it, so you just have to trust me. You can see the colors, so you can see the green and you can see the red. Basically, what we've got here is 5 months worth of solar radiation data by the day from the roof of my machine shed south of London Mills, Illinois. So this would be northern Fulton County. So for the month of May, we accumulated a total of 1,349 kilowatt hours, which would be an average of 43.5 per day. For the month of June, which June should be, based on day length, June should be the highest solar radiation month. However, June is also typically a fairly high moisture month. And so the amount of rainfall that you get is certainly going to interact with the solar radiation, because if it's cloudy and rainy, you're not getting a lot of solar radiation. So a lot of people had a pretty wet June. So a wet June, while that's not uncommon, is going to impact solar radiation. So for the month of June, I had a total of 1,436 for an average of 47.9 per day. July, total of 1,435, basically identical to June, average of 46.3 per day. For August, 1,526 for an average of 49.2 per day, which was the high. So the highest total and the highest average per day solar radiation for me at London Mills at my farm was actually the month of August. And then September was still fairly similar, 1,392, average of 46.4 per day. So I just find it interesting that, as sunlight quality, day length changes through the year, the growing season of 2021, within a few kilowatt hours per day, actually, got roughly the same amount of sunlight in May, June, July, August, and September. And if you look at the individual daily accumulations, I find this interesting as well. My peak day was May 29th. So on May 29th, that system generated 70 kilowatt hours of energy. And basically, if you think about a plant, Adam knows more about photosynthesis than I do, but if you think about a corn plant, really all it is a solar collector. And it's taking sunlight, and instead of turning sunlight into electricity, it turns sunlight into sugar, and then it turns sugar into starch, or in the case of soybeans, turns sugar into protein. And that's what that plant is making. It's not making electricity, it's making grain, but it's taking sunlight, making grain. My solar system is taking sunlight, making electricity. So, I just find it interesting that May 29th, which should not be, the peak day of the growing season, and I hit 70 kilowatt hours that day. The days in green on this chart are all the days that were 60 and above. So I just arbitrarily said that if you generated more than 60 kilowatt hours on my solar system, that was a pretty good sunny day. The red days are below 40. So the red days would be significantly below average. And some of those red days, there's a day, June 19th, 2. May 28th, 11. There's a 10 in here. So July 11th, if you want good corn, I'm going to say that on July 10th and 11th, you shouldn't be getting 12 and 10 kilowatt hours when a good day is 70. So you can also see on this chart, looking at the colors, my apologies as well. We're going to convert Ask the Agronomist into a podcast. And this podcast episode is going to really suck because you're not going to be able to see this pretty piece of paper that you're here with. But what I wanted to point out was if you look at the June column, which is the second column, and you look at the second half of June, which would start about right here, and look at all the red in late June. There is one good sunlight day in late June. Late June is our summer solstice. June 21st is, the longest day, the most daylight of the year here in the Northern Hemisphere. And actually June 22nd was a pretty good day, got 68 kilowatt hours. But other than that, 25, 2, 30, 56, 18, 32, 29, 48, 25, 43, and 30 kilowatt hours for the last 2 weeks of June. So we know tar spot likes low light levels. Well, what'd we give tar spot in late June at my place? A lot of moisture and low light. So perfect environment to get tar spot kicked off in the middle of the latter part of June. So I just think this is interesting. And I think there's a lot of things when I look at this data that kind of make some of the things that we experienced this year make sense. The way I think low sunlight levels could have adversely impacted our corn in certain parts of the state is this. If that plant was not photosynthesizing at peak capacity, it was not producing as much sugar as it should have through the day. The process of respiration at night is going to burn up that sugar that plant produced through the day. The process of making grain is going to burn up that sugar. Plants that are in a low food situation, or Adam's fancy term with that would be source limited. Those plants are under more stress. A corn tissue that is low in sugar is more susceptible to disease infection. Plants that are low in sugar, they're going to have to get that sugar they need from somewhere. That's what cannibalization does, is when that plant is remobilizing stored reserves out of that plant to help it finish off the year. So we obviously had a lot of disease issues in corn this year. We obviously had a lot of stock cannibalization, a lot of plant health issues, and all of those, relate back to, how capable was that plant of feeding itself? How much sugar did it have? How much food did it have? How much stress was it under? All these things are interconnected. I also looked at weather data. So if I was going to design the perfect growing season, I'd want to start out in a drought. So an April, early May drought is perfect for us. May is a pretty wet month for us on average. So I think our average rainfall for May is about 4.5 inches. That's really more than we need. If you could get about half normal rainfall in May, close to normal rainfall in June, about 150% normal rainfall in July, and about 200% normal rainfall in August. And if you could get it to rain Saturday night every week for the right amount to get the total that you want for the month. So if I want 6 inches of rain in July, I want an 1.5 inches of rain every Saturday night through the month of July. Why do I want it at night? So it doesn't interfere with my sunlight collection during the day. Why do I want it on Saturday night? So I can go to church Sunday morning and not feel guilty about not getting work done at home. So, when you have a lot of rainy days, a lot of low sunlight days, too much moisture, I had 170% of normal rainfall in June. How many of you have heard a dry June makes good corn? So that's a fairly common saying. I think that's a little bit bogus in that I'm not sure that, a dry June is particularly doing anything to make good corn, but it's very true because a wet June makes really bad corn. So when it's too wet in June, that's impacting, nitrogen availability, that's impacting nitrogen loss, that's impacting the root health, that's impacting crown rot, that's impacting the ability of those plants to breathe. It's impacting everything with that plant, all in a bad way. So when you've got, good soil moisture conditions, not too wet, not too dry, that's great for oxygen availability. That's great for nutrient availability. It's great for that plant to be able to grow. It's great for that plant to be able to root down. Corn plants don't actually root deeper when it's dry. That corn plant is not recognizing consciously that, damn, it's dry. I need deeper roots. I need to go deeper for water. Its roots just grow. And if something doesn't inhibit the growth of its roots, it's going to root to the same depth, whether it's wet or dry. But when it gets too wet, the roots can't grow. So it's not that it's rooting deeper when it's dry because it's trying to get to water, but it roots shallow when it's wet because roots can't grow in a anaerobic environment. So it's kind of true, but it's not true for the reason that some people think it's true, that a dry June is good for corn. But a wet June is really bad for corn. So at my farm at home, we had 133% of normal rainfall in May. We had 170% of normal rainfall in June. We had 48% normal rainfall in July. We rebounded to normal rainfall in August, and then we had 38% normal rainfall in September. Now, ironically, October and November were so damn wet, I'm way above average for the year. But, if you want to design a crappy corn year, drown it in June and then give it less water than it wants the rest of the summer and hit it with some crown rot and some tar spot and some southern rust. The corn on this farm made like 188-ish. And I'm probably lucky it was that good when I look at the weather that Mother Nature gave it. So just something I wanted to share with you. We're going to dig more into this and see, if this truly was a low light year. The other thing I looked at was how many days did we actually have measurable precip in each of those months. And, I don't know how this relates to normal. May we had rain on 7 days. June we had rain on 8 days. July we had rain on 5 days. August I had rain on 7 days. So even though I had 3.25 inches of rain in August, but that was scattered out over 7 days. And then I had rain on 1 day in September, and it was 1.3 inches, and that's what we had for the month. So I don't know, just for what it's worth, if you wonder where this data came from, so all the rainfall data I pulled out of my climate account. So if you've got a climate account, you can do this for every farm you've got. You can look at temperature, daytime and nighttime. You can look at rainfall, amount, number of days it rained. You can look at the total. You can plot it versus a 5, 15, or 30-year average. So there's a lot of analysis you can do of the weather that each one of your farms, and I will tell you this, I had previously pulled weather data from a different farm of mine that's about 30 miles from where I live. And at first I was using the weather data from that farm and the solar data from the farm I live on, because that's where the solar system is. And it dawned on me this morning, I better be careful doing that, because the weather was different between those two farms. And holy cow, was it different. When I actually looked at the rainfall amounts between those two farms, there was dramatic differences. This particular farm that I just shared with you, it was way wetter in June, way drier in July, way drier in August, and way drier in September than the other farm that I had previously looked at weather data on. So if you don't think rainfall amounts vary from farm to farm to farm, go back and look at that historical data in your climate account and just see, if you're trying to figure out why was this farm so much worse than that one, there might be some pretty good clues just looking at that historical weather data to help explain that. So anything you want to add to that, Adam, or any questions have come in?
No questions yet. I mean, obviously,
I guess that wasn't as fascinating as I thought it was.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably one of the things that you just pointed out, Lance, that makes it a very difficult conversation to have a general talk about, is that the weather does vary a lot from location to location. Weather being rain, weather being the interaction of the rainfall, and then the lack of solar radiation that you're getting. I mean, it takes all the right components at the right time to really make a good yield and a good harvest. So,
well, I think the other problem we get into, we're always looking to explain something. Well, we're looking for one variable that explains what we saw. Well, there's not just one variable affecting yield. There's about 100. And when we zone in on, so let's say it's solar radiation. So let's say I generate solar radiation data that shows that this area should have been low yielding based on low solar radiation, and it produced a phenomenal yield. Well, it didn't produce a phenomenal yield because it had less sunlight, but it might have produced a phenomenal yield because it had less crown rot, less tar spot. Maybe it was the hybrid, maybe it was the planting date, maybe it was the soil, maybe it was the rainfall. We get focused in on that one variable, and we always try to make that variable the reason why something happened. And the interaction between those 100 variables, which we can't analyze 100 variables, or at least I can't, Adam might be able to, but the interaction between all those variables, that's what explains what happened. But that's really hard to figure out. Maybe a little more of this and a little less of this, was important. And we're looking at this one, not paying any attention to this one. And it's really the interaction between the two that explains the mystery. And that's what makes the mystery so hard to explain, and why the favorite agronomist saying is, everybody say it with me, it depends. So,
well, back to my days at the University of Illinois and with Fred Belo, there's a reason why weather is the
name
number
dropper.
one. Yeah, dropped it. There's a reason why weather was the number one thing, because you just can't ignore it. No matter what set of circumstances, what set of treatments we're using, the weather always interacts with it and affects the whole system. So,
well, and we try to, corn breeders have been trying to weatherproof corn since corn breeding started. So how you want to weatherproof your corn? You want to weatherproof it against anaerobic soil conditions. You want to weatherproof it against drought. You want to weatherproof it against heat. You want to weatherproof it against a particular disease that was favored by certain weather conditions. It's really hard to fix everything. And that's what we try to do when we're breeding corn. We're trying to make hybrids that can yield a ton, come out of the ground great, have awesome roots, have awesome stalks. They're resistant to any disease that Mother Nature might someday invent. They can get by with less nitrogen than they would like to have, and they dry down really fast, and you like to pick them. That's what we're trying to do. We fall short of that every single time because that's impossible to do. And that's why we're trying to sell a package of hybrids in some cases, because some hybrids do this better than that. And hopefully if you've got those 8 or 10 hybrids across your farm, you will, be able to navigate through, whatever Mother Nature throws at you. But 21, that was kind of a wicked knuckleball that Mother Nature threw at us. And that made it really, really tough to, know how to navigate through.
Yeah. And, I think most operations experience some really good things that happen and maybe not so good things that happen. So just illustrating all the dynamics at play there. And I think we've come a long ways at trying to weatherproof both corn and soybean varieties. And But Mother Nature still rules the
Yep.
world when it comes
Yep.
to growing anything. So
Yep.
she can throw a curveball or a knuckleball, like you said. And let's talk about one thing, if you don't mind, Lance,
Yeah.
that maybe contributes to trying to do as best job we can at weatherproofing ourselves with our operation and our decisions, and maybe talk in regard a little bit to relative.
So,
we're making a lot of corn decisions right now.
Yep.
And let's talk about the merit of having different hybrids and what that does for us. And maybe, talk a little bit in regards to relative maturity and how big a differences that typically makes with moisture and dry down and those types of things that come into play when we're talking about those relative maturity differences in products.
Right. So a lot of things we could talk about there. So, I mean, one thing that I've always challenged growers to do is plant a wider range of relative maturities. We tend to, as an industry, we get into some hot genetics. So for a lot of years, I think a lot of people would say that in the 115 RM, and the way we count it, 115 would go from about 112 and a half up to 117 and a half. That's kind of been the sweet spot for DeKalb. A lot of our best, most popular, most consistent, most awesome, everybody loves them products have been in that 115 RM. Well, what happens is if you're buying seed from a company that has a sweet spot where they got a lot of really good products, you start narrowing in your relative maturity zone, because everybody, you want to plant the best, right? What do you don't go to your seed supplier and say, I want 2 average products, I want a couple good ones, and give me 1 crappy one. You say, what's your best? Well, if that company thinks their best is a 113, a 114, a 115, you're going to plant a lot of 113, 114, 115, which, in some years is a great thing to do. 21 was one of those years where having a wider range of products was better. We focus a lot as a company on dry down, and I would argue in my market, we probably focus more on dry down than we should, because my bigger challenge is not the corn's too wet. It's we can't get it out of the field fast enough before it's 14% coming out of the field. And in a perfect world, agronomically, this varies for everybody based on your drying costs, but based on agronomics and yield and harvestability, the more corn you can pick in the low 20s, probably the better off you're going to be. So especially if you've got, on-farm drying, or you've got a situation where your drying costs are not outrageously high, you're going to gain more in yield than you're going to sacrifice in drying costs in a lot of cases, picking more corn in the low 20s. So when you've got 2,000 acres that are ready to harvest now, you can't get it all out at the proper moisture. So widening your range of relative maturity. So plant some early corn, plant some full season corn, plant a bunch of stuff in between. And if you put a little bit of thought into, and I know Mother Nature can screw this up, but if you put a little bit of thought into where you put that 120-day corn, by the time you get there, it's not going to be 28% like you're afraid it was going to be when you planted it. It's going to be 17 and a half, and that'll be perfect. And if you plant some 105-day corn, 107-day corn, 109-day corn, to give yourself the ability to start early on something with reasonably dry moisture and spread that out. So my challenge to producers is I'd like to see at least a 10-day spread in relative maturity on the corn that you plant, and I'd like to see a 1-day spread or 1 RM spread on your soybeans. So if you're planting early group 4s as your full season beans, you probably ought to have some early group 3s to go with them. If your full season corn you're willing to plant is 116-day, then you probably ought to have some 105, 106, 107 out there somewhere. Give yourself more time. And even if you do sacrifice a little bit of yield on that early corn, getting more of your acres harvested timely will probably make up for that yield. And if you do have a little bit of higher moisture in that fuller season corn, I think you'll make up for that higher moisture with additional yield. such that it's not really going to be a penalty to you. So, Adam, to answer your question of, how does relative maturity relate to moisture? I mean, that's really hard to say because it varies so much with product, and there really is no industry standard. So there is no chart somewhere that breeders use that, well, if it's a day later, it's got to be a half a point wetter. It doesn't really work that way. And I argue that, our breeders for years gave, I'll say extra credit points to hybrids that were drier. And, in the real world, sometimes it doesn't work that way because you can't harvest everything the same day. And if by the time you get to it, everything's dry, the fact that corn was drier a week earlier really means nothing to you as a grower. So I actually want corn to be a little bit wet when we harvest it, because if it's 14% when you pick it, that means it's been dead for a long time. That probably means you've lost some yield. That means it's shelling at the head. That means that it probably looks like it's about ready to fall over, and you're on the phone with Adam going, "What is this crap you sold me? It looks like this thing's a disaster waiting to happen. I'm one windstorm away from being really upset at you." That's just a really challenging position to put Adam in. So be kind to Adam and give yourself a range of maturities on hybrids. Give yourself more time to get it out timely. And I guess, I'm looking back at my harvest of 21, and logistics are such a challenge. I mean, we got trucking shortages. We've got people shortages. We got parts shortages. We just can't be at 100% peak efficiency every single day during harvest in the current environment that we're in. And to expect to be able to do that's a little bit, my wife tells me all the time, well, you were dumb in the first place for expecting that. So why do you get so upset when your expectations are not met because they were crazy in the first place? So, give yourself more time to get through harvest. And the best way agronomically to give yourself more time to get through harvest is to enable yourself to start earlier, enable yourself to finish later. And the way you do that is you plant a wider range of hybrids. So anything, Adam, you want to add to that?
No, I think that's excellent. I feel pretty strongly about that myself, that typically what happens is we wait for the first stuff to reach the dryness level that we want. And by the time we get to the rest of the farm with whatever delays there might be it equipment, be it weather, so on and so on.
Right.
We're head shelling bad, and we got standability issues, and we're fighting Mother Nature. Just, every breath we wake up every morning, we're looking at the weather, watching the weather to see if there's going to be a big storm coming.
Right.
How hard do we need to hit it? So I think there's a lot of merit and a lot of value. And I think 2021 probably illustrated that as good as any year, that having that spread and that range is really in your favor as a farmer and a grower to try and get things done timely and end up with the most yield that you possibly can get.
Right. I mean, we sometimes, we don't do a very good job generating data on some of our early hybrids because we don't sell as much early corn. You're not interested in as much early corn. Your expectations for it are different. And if we throw a 103 day or 105 day or 107 day into one of our plots that's got a 117 day hybrid in it, and the plot gets harvested at the right time for the 117, you really did a huge disservice to the early corn. And so it's hard to get good data. What I've started doing to try to get better data on our early hybrids is go to growers who raise early corn and put a small mini early corn hybrid plot out in a field of their 105 day corn. And that way we know that plot's getting harvested timely, and timeliness of harvest can actually, in some cases, be more important than hybrid when it comes to determining the yield. And that's a big thing I ask growers to remember as well. When you're sitting down at the end of the year and you're looking at your field averages and you're looking at your hybrid averages, and if you only had 40 acres of a hybrid and you picked it all in September, and you're trying to compare that to the farm average of 400 acres of corn that you finished up with in December or November, that's really an apples to oranges comparison. So pay attention to the harvest date and the harvest moisture when you're looking at performance of products, because a product that was harvested in September at 22% has a huge advantage over a product that was harvested in late November at 14%. just from a yield standpoint.
Absolutely. And Dirt Doctorful came in with a really good question.
Awesome.
Talking about variability and differences between our hybrids. He says, we got some pretty high nitrogen prices right now in the market, of course. He says, are there varieties that are more efficient with their nitrogen use?
Okay, so good question. There have been attempts made by us and other companies as well to actually rate hybrids for nitrogen need, nitrogen use, nitrogen timing. I'm not a big fan of a lot of those recommendations that are out there. I don't think there's enough data behind most of them to really be meaningful. If you want to do a nitrogen use rate study on corn hybrids, you better only do it once, because if you do it more than once, you'll see that it varies so much each time you do it that you'll pull out what's left of your hair trying to make heads or tails of things. So I don't subscribe to the theory that there are such things as late users and early users. And, corn by and large is going to use relatively similar amounts of nitrogen per bushel to generate the yield. Now, there are differences based on maturity. So we just had that conversation about relative maturity. Well, 105-day corn that's going to black layer the middle of August does not need as much late season nitrogen as a 120-day corn that's going to black layer the middle of September. Yield, maturity, planting date, soil type, weather, those things are going to impact the nitrogen need of that plant a lot more than hybrid does. So I'm not going to say that hybrid is irrelevant, but we had that conversation earlier about those 100 variables that are determining things. And when you list out all the variables that affect nitrogen, price, application timing, form, rate, weather, soil, crop rotation, yada, 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 go on down the line. Hybrid's probably in there somewhere in that list, but it's going to get so overshadowed by all of the other variables that I don't really think it's a variable that's worth paying a lot of attention to. So do we see hybrids that struggle more if they run out of nitrogen late? Yes, we do. I'll name a couple: 6434, 6357. Those are a couple hybrids that I've seen. If they run out of nitrogen late season, they go from being pretty awesome to pretty average. There are other hybrids that kind of withstand that better, but that doesn't mean I'm going to recommend more nitrogen on those hybrids or less nitrogen on other hybrids. It just means that, you need to be careful using those hybrids in fields where you might lose nitrogen, or you might want to be prepared to put out some supplemental nitrogen if you did lose your nitrogen and that you've got a hybrid that's a little bit more sensitive to that. But we have not really ever been able to determine that we can vary nitrogen rate by hybrid and achieve any sort of better ROI. That the differences are not as big as you would think, and they're very inconsistent, and they're oftentimes confounded with so many other things going on in the growing season. You're just chasing your tail. So the short answer to his good question would be no.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no silver bullet there, and no easy answer. There's just way too many factors that influence that nitrogen use efficiency curve from year to year, soil type to soil type. I mean, whether or not you've had a good growing season for excellent roots or whether you've got a poor root growing year,
Yeah. Did you get 500 pounds an acre mineralized or 100?
Yeah.
Out of your soil. So, you mentioned the response curve. So, if you're looking at, this could be population, could be nitrogen, kind of all work this way. Where we're trying to shoot for is somewhere up here towards the top of the curve, right before it flattens out, is typically where you want to be. Now, the trick is, is this, is the middle of this 200? Is the middle of that 160? Is the middle of that 300? What is the rate that's in the middle of that? We know that as you get up here on the flat part of the curve, you're not getting enough additional yield to offset the additional cost of the input that you just bought. The trick is we don't know from one year to the next what number is going to put you at the sweet spot here. we know average, we know typically, but it varies a lot. But and the price of the input and the price of the output. So as corn price goes up and nitrogen price goes down, you can afford to use more move further out on the curve. As the price of corn goes down and nitrogen goes up, then you need to slide back down this way. Now, the situation we're in right now, both the price of the corn and the price of the input are pretty high. So they're somewhat canceling each other out. If you had $400 a ton ammonia and $3 corn, that probably wouldn't be a hell of a lot different than $1,000 a ton ammonia and $5 corn if you do the math on what the right rate of nitrogen is. What do we want? We want $400 a ton ammonia and $5 corn. And we had that last year. Enjoy it. We won't have that for a while.
Yeah, it's such a moving target with so many variables that, people have been studying nitrogen and nitrogen use efficiencies and all these things for decades and decades and decades, a long time. And there's a lot of things changing. And I do think, generally speaking, we've found a lot of good management practices. We found a lot better products as far as hybrids and genetics are concerned that are all improving overall our nitrogen use efficiency. But there's still so much variability when you look at the curves from year to year that trying to explain it and getting that silver bullet for what's going to happen next year and picking the hybrid that is more nitrogen use efficient just isn't something that is possible to answer with any confidence, in my opinion.
Yep. We looked at it for a few years and kind of thought, there's nothing to see here. So we moved on to other more important, more manageable things.
Yeah.
So
I'd say if somebody asked me what one thing I think is the most important for nitrogen use efficiency, it's having good drainage. Trying to set up the best drainage system that you can for your given acres. That's, managing surface water with these big rain events that we're having. All those things, in my opinion, are going to help you with your nitrogen use efficiency. Obviously, multiple timings of nitrogen is also a big factor that contributes to it. But nitrogen interacts with water a lot, as we all know. So the better you can manage your water.
Well, and if your roots can't breathe, it doesn't really matter how good a job you're doing managing other things, because bad stuff's going to happen. So if you can keep that soil aerated and keep that plant so it can breathe, it's going to be able to utilize the nitrogen that's there versus a plant that's sitting in a swamp. It might be a swamp full of nitrogen, but it's not going to make any difference to that plant. So.
Right.
So I think you'd had a question that came in kind of seed size related, or maybe some frustrations around seed size. We haven't talked about that yet. So
absolutely.
So let's spend a little time there. So we've got 4 grades of seed at DeKalb, and everybody else has got their own system. But our 4 grades, are AF, AF2s. So we're pretty clever here. So AF2s are bigger than AFs, and ARs, R stands for round, F stands for flat, and the 2 is bigger than the 1. So basically, these are the smaller flats.
Small, medium, yeah.
These are the bigger flats. These are the smaller rounds, and these are the bigger. Now, one challenge in our system is, there's no guarantee how small gets or how big gets. So that's a little bit frustrating for people sometimes. But, we have a lot of differences of opinion amongst our customers. What's the best? The other reality is, and if nobody's told you this before, let me be the first. We are not in control of what the corn produces from the standpoint of seed size or shape. Now, we can influence size a little bit with a product that's called defol. So it's become kind of a common practice in the seed industry to actually kill seed corn prematurely to keep the kernels from getting too big. The other thing that impacts seed size on production acres is how good was the pollination. So the better the pollination is, the smaller the seed size. The worse the pollination is, the bigger the seed size. And if it's really bad, all you get is some really big rounds, and everybody loves those. So when you look at quality data, we put every grade we sell, every bag we sell goes through the same stringent testing protocols to determine quality. And I don't know if I want to tell you this, but there are some subtle differences between here. And if you think about it, the ear of corn here, your big rounds more tend to come from the butt. Your small rounds more tend to come from the tip, and your flats, on average, come from the middle part of the ear. If it was a well-pollinated ear, if it wasn't well-pollinated, kind of, that affects things. But on average, there is slightly, and when I say slightly, I mean slightly, it'd be like 0.5% or less advantage in quality to small flats. In some cases, what is the least popular grade of seed? Small flats, because some people perceive their planter can't plant small flats as well. Now, and unless you're using a planter that's as old as me, I would argue that your planter, if properly adjusted and properly set, will plant all of these. So I would say put your priority on the hybrid, not on the grade size. And I would challenge your equipment support people. If you've got a relatively new planter, I got some idea what you paid for it. It should plant any of that. If it doesn't, I get a different one, because there are planters out there that will plant any grade size we dump in it. You can even mix all 4 of those together, and a good planter would plant that. So I know it gets to be kind of an emotional thing. Well, I got to have this, or I got to have that, or I want it to be within a 4-pound range of weight, or it's got to be this grade size, or got to be that grade size. That we do the best we can, but there are limitations on that. Have a little bit of grace, get the right hybrid. If the grade size you wish you had is not available, get the second closest one to it that you can. But we have not figured out a way yet to make the plant make all 50-pound rounds, and we'll keep working on that. Any other questions come in, Adam?
Nope, no more questions. We're pretty much up here on time.
We're over time already, so
we are.
The hour goes fast. So thanks to those of you who took the time, and if you're listening to me in the deer stand, that's probably not great for hunting, but I appreciate you joining. And again, we will be back in 2 weeks, which is the 16th. Adam, is that right? So December 16th. Not sure where we're going to be. We'll probably go to another location just to make it easier on my buddy Chris, so he didn't have to drive all the way to Macomb. But we'll be together, hopefully, talking about crown rot, having a good time. Be a festive day. We'll do our giveaway. We're coming up close to Christmas. It'll be the last episode of the year. So I'm already looking forward to 2 weeks from today for our next episode. Everybody be safe. If you're out in the deer stand, don't injure yourself. And remember, you'll do a lot more to control the deer population shooting does than bucks. So everybody gets some does. They're better eating anyway. And have a good day. Thanks.